The idea of a generic inquiry is based in the concept that this inquiry is so basic in the sense that you can take any different type of inquiry or research design and take pieces of it. So if you happen to know what all the other qualitative research designs are, and one of them is not exactly right for what you want to do with your research, you can use a generic inquiry, which will allow you to take different types of questions or approaches to your study. In the essence, there's no set protocol, like, for example, in a case study or phenomenological study, where you have to have certain parameters met with how you interview people, how you assess the data, how you analyze the data. So with a generic inquiry, we find that there's many more opportunities to take combinations of other designs and put it in here. It's kind of like a mixed stew, if you will. It doesn't only have carrots and onions and potatoes and meat and other vegetables. It has a combination of all of them together. And what we see here is that in this inquiry design that we have the ability to seek, to discover, and understand. Now, this is true of many other qualitative research designs as well, is to discover somewhat through an exploratory process where you're gaining information and then distilling it down into something that's more manageable for others to understand. A lot of qualitative research and even quantitative research is designed to discover and understand. If you look at a phenomenological design, that's not necessarily the case. In phenomenology, we're more so looking to identify and report. We're not necessarily looking to understand. We're not necessarily looking for a big discovery. We're looking to find out what people's experiences were and document them and share them. Here in an inquiry design that's specifically titled generic inquiry, we want to create understanding, and I'll share some thoughts about that as I go through this lesson on what that means and how to really do it. The idea of a generic inquiry is to help identify what people experience. Maybe it's in a process, maybe it's in a situation or a phenomena, maybe it's something that's just occurred and it's ended, but the idea is you want to know what people experience. What would they have to tell you about what happened to them? Here we want to have people that are actually involved in the situation that you're researching, whereas a case study, they don't have to have had direct impact or direct application or experience in the situation, because we might do a case study, as I alluded in that lesson, about what life is like on Mars. Well, people haven't gone to Mars yet, so we can't ask them what they experienced. We can only ask them to project what they believe would be true. That would not be applicable in a generic inquiry because we want to know what people actually experience. So you have to have people who have real applications. And this is a little bit different from phenomenology, where yes, the people have to be part of the phenomena, but in phenomenology, again, we're looking for a different type of outcome than a generic inquiry. And this is where some of the differences are not truly understood by a lot of people. They just think, oh, here I can do most anything in regards to any kind of interviews. I can ask any kind of questions. I can use any kind of data that comes from any kind of reports or anything else that one can use in triangulation of information and data. But what we want to see here, more so, even with the generic inquiry, is about those experiences, asking this question or stating this, trying to figure out how they experience what they experience. So for example, if you experienced something, let's just say it was cancer, how did you experience cancer? Everybody talks about how they experience cancer, and many people experience it differently. Some, it's pretty depressing. Some are depressed at first and then they find some sort of inspiration to overcome it. Some fight it from the very beginning, and some just roll up and let it happen to them, right? The idea is, and how do you experience something? If it's in a process that's at work and you want to look at how the process is actually being managed, you might talk with people about what their role is in that. You know, what was their experience in the process? And then how did they experience it? Was it stressful? Was it simple? Was it easy? So we're not looking at only what did they experience, but how did people internally, intrinsically, with their feelings perhaps, and their inside thoughts. You know, we want to stay away from feelings whenever possible because that tends to be a psychological perspective in analyzing it. But in this case, maybe you want to look at people in regards to how they experience something in regards to their feelings. That's why perhaps generic inquiry is more popular in some of the psychology-based programs than business programs, although there are many business programs that still promote the use of generic inquiry. And I'm going to share some insights on that and personal school of thought on that as I go through this presentation as well. So when you think about considering applying a generic inquiry, maybe you are a student or a faculty member or even somebody doing corporate research, if you want to know what they experienced alone and don't care how they experienced it, then maybe that is more so a case study. But if you want to really know how they experienced what they experienced, what happened to them internally, what they thought, what they processed, those kind of reflective kind of outputs, then this generic inquiry might be the right design for you. The generic inquiry is less defined structure. There's a less defined structure in generic inquiry because there's no set protocol. With a set protocol like phenomenology, you have to ask questions a certain way with certain words, asking about their assumptions, beliefs, and perceptions to get their literal lived experiences. In a case study, there are also avenues to align with, if you will, or just make sure that the research questions are aligned to the interview questions with the specific case study. For example, if you're going to be doing a descriptive case study, we're asking people to only describe something. Well, in a generic inquiry, you can have people describe something to you, and the next question, ask them to explain something to you. You can ask different types of questions, and therefore, the less defined structure brings into question the inherent rigor of the design. I'm of the school of thought where I do not encourage students to use a generic inquiry. That's just my personal belief. That doesn't mean it's right or wrong. I just believe that with extra work that one can move to something that's more rigorous, more structured, because the idea of research in an academic model is to teach and help students understand the requirements of research. And when you give them something that's so generic that anything flies, they may leave with the understanding that research is very simple and there's not many rules, when in fact the generic inquiry is only but one of many designs, and the majority of the other designs do require a lot of rigor. And perhaps that's why we find this more so in student work where it's applied. I've never seen this generic inquiry applied in a corporate setting. I've never seen it applied outside of a dissertation or a master's thesis. That's not to say it hasn't been. I'm just saying I haven't seen it that way. I could see where maybe in a corporate setting you might want to do something in regards to a generic inquiry if there's something you want to find out and you just have so many things you want to find out, in the sense that you don't have anything to kind of go from, some educated guess. So you're very early in the process and you want to find out what people have experienced and how they experienced it, where there's nothing else before as a baseline, and you're maybe more so creating a baseline with the application of an initial generic inquiry. Oftentimes you'll hear or read the confusion of a generic inquiry. Some people will call it basic qualitative design. Some will call it simple design, and some will call it interpretive design. All the designs in qualitative research are qualitative designs, so that strikes that one out from my perspective in what people say or write, because that gets a little too confusing for me, because they're all certain designs. A case study, phenomenology, a narrative, they're all qualitative designs. It's a simple design. I think that describes this the best, is because it's so simple, because anything goes. There's no real rigor in the sense of applying certain parameters or protocols, as I mentioned earlier. An interpretive design, well, pretty much everything in research is interpretive. We're going to interpret the data. We're going to try to synthesize the data. We're going to analyze it and evaluate it. And that's all an interpretive process. Referring to a generic inquiry in these manners that I've noted here, and there's probably others as well. These are the three that I'm more familiar with and read about the most and hear the most frequent, where I work with, where they kind of promote the generic inquiry for students to use. The most important point is, if you're hearing these kind of terminology, these terms being used, if you will, that you ask for clarification, because somebody may not just truly understand what they're talking about, particularly if they're a student or perhaps a faculty member who doesn't have a lot of experience yet. The idea of part of my program that you're listening to in this lesson and the others is to help you become a more informed consumer of research, and that way it'll allow you to read documents better, research reports better, be involved in research-related conversations, and be cognizant of what people are saying and what you will be saying. The generic inquiry seeks to identify. It seeks to identify information, and this is true of all research. It's notable to mention here because there's no reporting in the sense of the generic is first to identify as much as you can about everything that you can related to the topic. Again, because there's no protocol and there's no real set boundaries, you can seek to identify, and you can spend a lot of time in a generic inquiry just seeking to identify, because maybe the only outcome of a generic inquiry is to identify certain factors and do nothing else with them. But the idea is once you identify them, yes, you want to understand something about the factors, but maybe you're not going to make any recommendations because the only outcome is to identify certain factors. That's good research. If you want to know what are the factors about a certain situation, then that's fine. That could be the end goal of research. It's just to find out what those factors were and have an understanding about what each of those factors were. Then you could take those factors and create perhaps a Likert type survey from and do some sort of quantitative analysis, or use those factors to ask questions in a case study or phenomenological design. If we go back to the epistemology basic root of what a generic inquiry is most research is related to the study of the nature and origin and the limitations of human knowledge. Everything we do when we identify and report information, research is really designed to provide vehicles for us to really look at human knowledge. If you happen to be in the more scientific realm and you're doing research of test tubes and of different types of viruses in the healthcare arena, things like that at the pharmaceutical level, it may not be true about the human knowledge, but most of the people who are going to be listening to this program are involved with human behavior, human types of social research, if you will. And so the epistemology of this generic inquiry, as with most inquiries, come from the study of human knowledge. How do people know what they know? For example, in a situation, if you want to find out what they experienced, you would be looking at the origin of their human knowledge. How did they get it? What made them perceive certain things a certain way? Maybe somebody who came from one culture perceived the same situation differently as somebody else, because people from different cultures have different understandings, and they may have a different perspective on how they synthesize information or how they analyze it based on their own framework. This is where it takes us back to the concepts of theoretical and conceptual frameworks in research, is to have a foundation where we know the results can be tied to, or in the case of people, when you're asking them questions, to have a framework from which each person is grounded in their own school of thought, their own personal philosophies, their own religions, maybe their own beliefs about what work is. So as we start to look at human nature, we start to look at, what's the basic foundation. And when we do such research, we want the researchers to have a greater perspective of more than just what they're doing, but why they're doing what they're doing. I tend to believe that with greater focus, this could easily shift to other more rigorous design. And what I mean by that, as I mentioned a few minutes ago in an earlier slide, is I'm not of the school of thought where I believe generic inquiry is the best for students to use, because I don't believe it's rigorous enough. Maybe that's why they give it to so many students or allow so many students to do it, because it's so simple. They can get done and graduate. I'm not really big on just getting done and graduate. I'd like them to get done on time. I want them to graduate, but I also want them to leave with the best learning experience about research. And if doing qualitative research, I believe they need to do more than just the basics for a graduation. There's nothing wrong with good research that's applicable, but doctoral dissertation research should be more significant, more substantial, because it's a learning exercise. It's an academic exercise. It's guided by people who help the student get their work done. So if we make it too easy on the student, and the student has to do research later in life after they graduate, they may not really know. And I have found it to be true that if too many people do generic research and they want to become faculty members and they decide they want to teach research, they really don't have the foundation, because they didn't do one of the more rigorous aspects, where more applications such as doing member checking or doing a field test and just doing the different aspects that are required for the more rigorous research.